What do the English at Crecy, the armies of the First World War, the soldiers fighting in Ukraine all have in common? There might be a few different answers here, but there's one that stands out to me the most. Obstacles. Whether a simple hole in the ground or an elaborate, multi-layered defense of minefields, dragon's teeth, and barbed wire, they all use obstacles to shape the battlefield, and often these obstacles were the decisive factor in the battle. In fact, at the end of the video, I'll discuss a modern obstacle that will be decisive in the next major war, one that very few other people are talking about, so stay tuned to the end for that. But today on the Warfighter Archives, we'll be covering obstacles, their uses, effectiveness, and why the same principles are used on the battlefields of modern Ukraine as were used by the English at Agincourt. Also, check back next week for our video on battlefield fortifications, which is a topic that is closely related but far from the same. And with that in mind, what is an obstacle versus a fortification? An obstacle is anything that disrupts, delays, blocks, or channels enemy movements. A battlefield fortification is a purpose-built structure, often semi-permanent in nature, that is designed to be defended. Thus, unlike fortifications, an obstacle isn't usually designed for direct defense. Instead, it's designed to impair or manipulate the enemy's freedom of movement. It's important to note that the two are often used together. Most famously in World War I, most of the major powers used a combination of obstacles such as barbed wire in conjunction with fortifications like bunkers and trenches. In Ukraine, both armies make extensive usage of trenches and fortified strongpoints along with minefields, barbed wire, and anti-tank traps. With that out of the way, let's discuss different types of obstacles. Here, I've devised my own relatively easy to understand system for classification with 3 types of man-made obstacles and a 4th type that covers those that occur naturally. We'll go over each in detail with some examples and showcase how they were used on the battlefield. Nuisance obstacles are quite common throughout the history of warfare. These are the first type, and they're designed to impede or block an enemy's movement, but usually in a passive manner that poses little physical risk to enemy soldiers. So with that being said, you might wonder, why use nuisance obstacles? Well, these obstacles are usually cheap to produce and can be invaluable for buying time at relatively low cost and little risk. In addition, by making an avenue of approach substantially more difficult, it can encourage the enemy to use an avenue of approach that the defender prefers. At the same time, nuisance obstacles are useful for buying time or forcing the enemy army to expend more time to reach its destination. For example, creating roadblocks in Ramadi, insurgent groups would delay our platoon by forcing us to find and navigate an alternative route. Just because nuisance obstacles pose little physical risk doesn't mean they can't have a dramatic effect on a campaign and even a war. In fact, the US may owe some of its existence to nuisance obstacles. When General Burgoyne started his march south from Lake Champlain, American patriots felled trees across the only road that led south. This tangle of fallen trees slowed Burgoyne's march to a crawl, which had the added effect of making him burn through valuable provisions. This delay allowed time for the Americans to assemble the army that was ultimately victorious at Saratoga, which is long considered one of the decisive battles of the Revolution. The next category are disabling obstacles, which are designed to limit an enemy's ability to move or fight effectively as opposed to killing them outright. Unlike a nuisance obstacle, they may cause significant harm or disable the enemy's transportation. An ancient version of disabling obstacles are pits and caltrops. While these might not be fatal, at least not immediately, they would certainly have a high chance of disabling a charging horse, thereby removing the enemy's ability to maneuver. Modern examples include items such as dragon's teeth pictured here, or other tank traps. While they won't kill a tank's crew, they can certainly disable the tank if it gets stuck on them, or remove its ability to maneuver within the area covered by the tank trap. Disabling obstacles are often used to stop an enemy in an area where they can be easily targeted with missile weapons. For example, at Crecy, the English dug pits in front of their lines. These disabling obstacles slowed or stopped the French charge, allowing the longbowmen to fire at slow-moving or stationary targets as opposed to galloping knights. In Ukraine, both the Russians and Ukrainians make use of dragon's teeth and minefields to create complex defensive networks. These obstacles are often used to create killzones, a technique that we'll discuss in just a minute. The third type of obstacles are lethal obstacles, and they're just that, lethal. Whereas a disabling obstacle may cause death in the process of disabling the enemy's movement, that's not its primary goal. Lethal obstacles are designed to limit an enemy's movement and cause death or serious bodily harm. Older examples of this were things like a pit trap with spikes in it. The most obvious modern example is the minefield, which not only denies an enemy easy maneuver, but also aims to maim or kill soldiers that enter the minefield. The last category are natural obstacles, and these include things like rivers, swampland, muddy ground, woods, and anything else that would impede the movements of an army. These play a large role in many battles throughout history. For example, the Spartans at Thermopylae chose a position that was protected by incredible natural obstacles. Against French crusaders, the Mamelukes opened the floodgates on the Nile, flooding the countryside and preventing easy maneuver, advance, or escape with devastating consequences. And in modern times, there's substantial evidence that the Russians used a similar strategy by damaging the Kakhovka Dam to flood the countryside south of Kherson. This created a natural obstacle that stalled Ukrainian momentum on the Kherson axis and gave the Russians time to reorganize and reform. But now that we've discussed different types of obstacles, let's dive deeper. Why are obstacles used? How does one maximize them? Let me know some of your thoughts in the comments section below and tell me what I missed or should have included. But one thing that might surprise you is that the most important reason is not actually the most obvious one. It's actually not just about stopping or slowing down the enemy. One of the key uses for obstacles is to create what we call a kill zone. By using obstacles, you can trap an unsuspecting enemy where they can be easily targeted by your missile troops. In medieval warfare, the English longbowmen were masters of this. They would use stakes to fix the French in a kill zone and then pummel them with arrows. Caught in front of an English obstacle that they can't easily bypass and crowded by their comrades, the French would make easy targets for the English archers. We see this done excellently at Crecy and Agincourt. In both cases, the English used obstacles, pits at Crecy, and stakes in a hedgerow at Agincourt to slow or stop the French attack. Once the attack is stalled, the English archers let loose a hail of arrows from their longbows, causing devastation in the French ranks. But the idea of using obstacles to create a kill zone for missile troops didn't die with the longbowmen. Instead, it refined and became even more lethal. Indeed, this English strategy that was used in the 1400s is very similar to the strategies used by both sides on the Western Front in World War I. Barbed wire was strung liberally across the no man's land with the goal of creating a disabling obstacle. I call it disabling because if you try to sprint at full charge speed through barbed wire, you're going to have a really bad day. Enemy infantry would therefore have to stop to clear the barbed wire, much as French knights would have to stop to remove or cut through the sharpened stakes. And instead of longbows, the defenders would open fire with massed artillery barrages and machine guns. It was the same principle executed on an exponentially more devastating scale. And in Ukraine, we see the same fundamental ideas being used again. During Ukraine's summer offensive, the Russians used minefields, a lethal obstacle, to disable Ukrainian vehicles. This caused a temporary halt in the attacking Ukrainian formation, which allowed the Russians to call in artillery and airstrikes, which caused even more casualties. This was a critical reason that summer offensive bogged down and ultimately failed. So, creating kill zones is one of the most important ways in which obstacles are used in warfare. But do you know something that doesn't have any obstacle to it? Hitting the like and subscribe button. I doubt that ambush tactic actually worked, but it was worth a try. And in all seriousness, if you do enjoy this content, a like and subscribe lets me know that this is the type of content that brings value to you, the viewer, and that tells me to keep making more of it. But back to our topic. There are other ways that obstacles can be used effectively in warfare. Another obvious answer is to delay the enemy. I covered this earlier when I discussed Burgoyne's march south, so I won't go over it again. Suffice to say, time is one of the most valuable resources a commander has, a subject that we'll cover in a future video. A third way to use obstacles is to encourage an enemy to select a particular avenue of approach. What do I mean by that? Well, in any battle, it is key for commanders on both sides to identify good avenues of approach. The last thing you want is to prepare your defensive positions in one direction only to have the enemy rudely show up behind you and render them useless. A good way to do this is to utilize obstacles to prevent the enemy from arriving from an unexpected direction. This is why we see countless armies anchor their flanks against dense woodlands or rivers, natural obstacles that are difficult for an enemy army to pass through. Moreover, by limiting the avenues of approach, you allow yourself to concentrate more of your resources on defending the most likely approaches. This allows a smaller force to be much more efficient and effective, even against a larger or better equipped enemy army. And those are a few of the ways that obstacles have been used to shape battlefields and decide battles over the centuries. But how do commanders counter enemy obstacles? Give me some of your ideas in the comment section below, and I'll cover a few of the historical methods. The key concept to walk away with is that all obstacles can be cleared. The question is, how many resources does the army expend to clear the obstacle? Closely related, is the expenditure of those resources worth it, especially when compared to the resources needed to bypass the obstacle? And remember, time is a resource, one of the most valuable to any commander. But let's start going over those methodologies, and first of all, we have some low-tech solutions. For example, French pioneers in the Napoleonic period carried large axes. These could be used for clearing wooden obstacles, as well as for battering down doors and battering down British soldiers. The axe remains a part of the ceremonial uniform for the French Foreign Legion's pioneers. For a more modern example, when I served in the army, we trained to clear landmines by probing them with a bayonet. If you think that's time-consuming and stressful, it most certainly is, and you also ideally want to have troops equipped with mine detectors to locate the landmines first. And herein lies the problem. While low-tech solutions are effective and easy to field, they are usually time-consuming and they expose your soldiers to more risk. Battering down a door with an axe is certainly effective, but it can take time, and while you're swinging away at the door, the enemy is shooting at you with their muskets. Similarly, soldiers with mine detectors are slow-moving and pretty upright targets. Luckily, innovations in warfare have brought new ways to clear obstacles. Tanks fitted with bulldozers or other special equipment can be used to clear Dragon's Teeth anti-tank traps or minefields. Once again, this is time-consuming as specialist-equipped vehicles often need to be brought forward or staged ahead of time. They also tend to be few in number, meaning that they need to be carefully protected. Another way to clear obstacles is with artillery fire. Quite obviously, a 155mm high explosive shell has a way of throwing things around and breaking them apart. Artillery was used extensively in World War I to try to clear paths through the barbed wire in the no man's land. Unfortunately, explosive clearance can be highly unreliable. Yes, an artillery shell will certainly throw barbed wire around. Unfortunately, it may just tangle it up more or create an even bigger mess along the preferred avenue of approach. Similarly, artillery will certainly detonate landmines, but it may not detonate all of them, meaning that they can still cause casualties or delay an advance. Moreover, artillery tends to leave these large craters, and these have to be treated as a form of natural obstacle by the troops crossing the avenue of approach. Speaking of natural obstacles, when it comes to those, there's an entire branch of the military that's dedicated to figuring out a way over, under, or around them. Specialist bridging units, for example, have been used as far back as the Romans to cross rivers. So what we see here is that there are a myriad of ways to defeat obstacles. However, obstacles remain effective and commonly used because each of these methods requires time and a lot of other resources, and all of this can throw a major wrench into the enemy's strategic planning. But I promised you guys a special bonus at the end, a modern obstacle that I believe will be decisive in the next great power confrontation. So here it is, and let me know in the comment section below what you think. The obstacle that I'm talking about is electronic interference and jamming. In the world of electronic warfare, jamming and other forms of interference will hinder the movement of electronic and radio signals the same way that a tank trap restricts the movement of tanks and other vehicles. Why does this matter? Well, most Western militaries, especially the United States, rely on small, agile forces that leverage technology to mass accurate firepower onto a target. This has been highly successful for US forces in conventional combat. For example, it delivered stunning victories such as Desert Storm, where precision-guided airstrikes followed by fast-moving GPS-guided ground elements rapidly pushed the Iraqi army back. But what happens if the adversary can use electronic obstacles to take away those technological advantages? Just as felled trees slowed Gentleman Johnny's march to Saratoga, so too can jamming stop the transmission of GPS signals to guided weaponry, or radio waves from going from a squad's radio to the company commander's radio. One day I'll make a video that fully details how I see electronic warfare and the electronic battle space as a true fourth dimension that revolutionizes warfare, much the same as the introduction of air power created a new three-dimensional battle space. But for now, let me know what you think in the comments section below. Next week, we'll be covering fortifications, especially battlefield fortifications, and how they often work hand in hand with obstacles. But before we get into that, do you think that obstacles can be effective without fortifications or units to overwatch them? Can they be effective simply by being there and forcing the enemy to remove them? And as always, thank you for watching and take care until the next time.